you.
Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Brilliant. So I'm going to talk a bit about the Mac Pro. It's not something that I own personally. It belongs to my employer. So just in case you think I've suddenly come into this huge windfall and been able to buy the most expensive bits of Mac kit on the planet, that's not actually true. We do use it professionally, but as you'll see from a video I'll show you in a minute, had a rather unfortunate situation in the lockdown that having this new bit of kit delivered to my work premises meant it was going to sit there for several months and not get used, which seemed like a real shame. We've been waiting for it for a while. So very kindly, they agreed for it to get delivered for me to be able to use here and during the lockdown, which has been very exciting. Not the sort of kit that I normally have at home, so that's good. I'm just going to switch on my screen sharing, so if you can just bear with me for just 1 second. And if I do that, hopefully you should be able to see my screen as well. So I'm actually going to drive in this presentation from the Mac Pro itself, because that seemed like a sensible thing to do. And so, yeah, I'm going to talk to you about new Mac Pro 2019, as it's called. Some of you will have seen the version before, which was a cylindrical type affair. While this was designed in 2019, they weren't really available until well into 2020, at least to some of the specs anyway. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit about that. But I thought what we'd do to start with, when this thing arrived, I thought it'd be a real shame not to record that moment. So what I did is I made a little video I'm going to show to you guys now about how we actually unbox this thing, because I thought you might be just a little bit intrigued as to how that works. So I'm just going to show that to you now. Here we are in the hallway at home, currently in coronavirus lockdown, and so essential work parcels being delivered here, and so amazingly we've got the new Apple Mac Pro sitting here in its box, and it's time to do a little bit of unboxing. So here we go. Not entirely sure how this carton is going to work. It looks like it's stuck down on the top edge here. So we'll do our best and see what happens. Well, they didn't want you getting into it by accident, I think that's fair to say.
Mark, it sounds like it's got a small baby inside.
I think I should have taken a course in weights before trying to open this thing. Yeah, we just had, for people that don't know, we just had our daughter. So
once I managed to break the adhesive on the top, finally into the packing case itself. Layer of foam in top here. Let's take that out. It looks like we're into the real business here. There's foam down the sides as well, and oh yes, this appears to be the real business thing. I think it's going to be one of those where I need to turn it upside down and turn it out. So let's give that a go. going to work. Out of the way. There we go. Ooh. Wow. And we're in. Well, there appears to be some sort of strap holding all that together. Let's put it the right way up. Oh yeah, I've got Velcro straps holding the thing in. That's it's quite amazing. So I presume I have to release that one. Similar on this side. And then, wow, the top lifts off. And I appear to have this computer that looks like something from sort of an industrial research unit. It's wrapped all in white packing paper there. Oh, there's all the essential bits underneath there, the usual Apple stickers and manuals and things. But this is the bit that we're all most interested in. And so I presume that this will, usual Apple design of packaging, it's all pinned around the bottom, keep it all pristine. Okay, I think I've worked out how we do this. There's a whole load of plastic sticky stuff that secured on the bottom just to protect everything, so we'll take that off, and hopefully now we should be ready for the grand unveiling. Yeah, here we go. Whoa, look at this thing. Still got plastic on all sides of it, but at least you can see the nature of it now, and it's really quite a fantastic bit of engineering. And I think we're going to have to take this plastic wrapper off now. Oh yeah, there we go. Start to see some reports. Side as well. And then finally, there's one on the top too. Right. So here we are. This is the new Apple MacPro. Shiny feet. Shiny cheese grater like exterior, Apple logo front and centre, and that's the more artistic side without the ports. And again, there we go. There's a big handle on the top here as well that you can use to presumably open the thing up so that you can gain access to the insides and add new expansion capabilities, all that sort of thing. Okay, so we've opened the handle, so now, all being well, I should be able to pull this up. And the cover should come off. And here we have the insides. Lots of fans on that side, not quite so impressive. But let's go around the other side. Wow, you can start to see the motherboard, power supply and the graphics module down here. And look at those fans. Man, that is some serious amount of airflow going on there. this is not one small bit of workstation. Let's hope those are speed controlled, otherwise this thing is going to sound like a helicopter taking off. I'm sure Apple's done all the right bits of engineering on that. So yeah, here we have it, the new Mac Pro. Got to rig it all up, put it into service.
Okay, so that was the unboxing. I hope that was suitably exciting. All that wrapping is sort of pretty much what you'd expect from Apple. So then I plugged the whole thing in and spoilt it all by putting Adobe Creative Cloud on there, but that's one of the key tools that we use for work. Had a quick look at all the specs. Don't worry, I'm going to talk you through that in a sec, so you can see all that in, all the useful stuff in there. Tells you how all the ports are set up and all those fantastic things. So all the tools are there to allow you to configure this thing and play with it, because it is probably the most expandable, certainly the most configurable Mac that Apple have got on the market as well. Better put a bit of Photoshop on there, a bit of Lightroom and Illustrator and stuff like that as well. I know that you guys will all be interested in that sort of thing. So yeah, I just left that doing its work. So I'll just stop that video and talk a little bit more about the machine itself. Just go back to my slides. There we have it. So, new Mac Pro. It's a lot of money. What does it buy you? Well, basically, obviously, it's got to be the most performant Mac out there. And that's going to be true for several years, even with the announcement of Apple Silicon and various other things like that are happening in the market. This is still going to be the workhorse for the next 3+ years, and probably way beyond that as well. It's going to take quite a lot of Apple Silicon chips to in combination to give you the same sort of performance as this beast. But eventually it will come. That's obviously Apple's strategic direction. We'll maybe talk a little bit about that later on. But the main thing and the main selling point that made us sort of go for this at work was just the expandability of it. We've got already 2 workstations that are based on the previous Mac Pro, the cylindrical Mac Pro, and we had the old shopping bag Mac Pro, much like this before that. The downside of the cylindrical ones, of course, is that there isn't any room to install anything in there. So we had expansion chassis stuck on the end of Thunderbolt cables, packed with expansion cards. We had extra storage, RAID arrays, all that sort of thing. Makes for quite a messy sort of system. And of course, you're having to bolt everything on externally, lots of power connections and all that sort of thing. And doesn't make it particularly reliable. Somebody can unplug something very easily and it stops working, which when you're sort of 7.5 hours through an 8-hour encode and suddenly something stops working, choice words are sometimes said. But also the flexibility of being able to configure this as well is a big sort of selling point. So what exactly do we get? Well, you get a very nice metal frame to start with that houses all this thing. And so, you know, that's sort of constructed in a very elegant way. But what really matters is what we stick inside that. So here's some pictures from the inside of it, or rather some renders actually for the fan, but fan ports. These are from Apple's slide set. Just to give you an idea, so obviously got a motherboard that's in the back there that's got a power supply, all sorts of expansion capabilities, and then the blue sort of shiny thing, sort of bottom middle is where the processor sort of bits sit, and then or is it actually a bit above it? Here we go. That's a good question. One of those two is the processor anyway. So how can you configure this thing? You can have up to 28 cores of processing in there, which is quite a lot. Most of the Macs that that we normally use, that I would normally use at home, might have 4 cores, or if you're really lucky, 8 cores. So as you can see, there's a huge capability for processing, huge amount of memory. But probably the most important thing is the PCI Express expansion slots. You can put up to 4 graphics cards in it if you're really serious about doing sort of rendering or design. Of course, you've got all the standard things in there, including a couple of network ports, but these are 10 gigabit network ports, so pretty speedy. Loads of options for configuring this thing. So you've got different processor options, RAM, SSD, graphics, even down to whether you put wheels on it. We did a build to order. And so what did we pick? Well, we knew we wanted it primarily for video work. And so we needed something that would do that very well, up to 8K video. So these are the actual options that we used, marked in pink there. So we went for the 24 core machine. It seemed to be the best compromise, probably the most expensive we could afford as well. 96 gig of RAM. It's got 2 terabyte SSD on board. It's got the best of the graphics card. It's only got a single one of them. You can put several of these things in, but we went for a single Radeon Pro Vega 2, which has also got 32 gigs of its own graphics memory. And we just went for the standard feet. We didn't put wheels on it. We didn't feel it needed wheels, otherwise it could sort of disappear somewhere rather quickly. And we didn't install the afterburner card, which is actually the video accelerator, which seems a bit strange, but actually we're running out of money at this point. So that we will add later, mainly because at the time we ordered it wasn't supported by the video editing package we primarily use, but that support is now there, or certainly in late beta anyway. So we'll probably be adding one of those when we get some more money. So expansion, one of the big reasons we wanted this is to be able to put stuff inside this Mac to make it do what we needed to do. It's got 8 expansion slots. Some of those are used by graphics, as you'll see in a sec, but even when you're using, as we are, 2 of those for graphics, still leaves you another 6 slots to be able to plug other sort of goodies in. And given that it's already got networking and Thunderbolt and all those other things as well on top of that, you really do have a lot of expansion capability. Here's some of the cards that you could potentially stick in there, and the one that we were really interested in was the one that's on the right hand side of that picture there, which is an Arja Kona 5. Arja, or AJA as some people call them, are one of the primary video IO card makers, so working in the TV industry. So if you want to get live video in and out of a Mac, then AJA are the people to go and talk to, and Kona 5 is their most impressive beast. So that thing will do 4 lots of 4K video, either in or out, or any combination of that, which is quite impressive. So you can have several video streams at 4K going in there. So for those of you that have got an HD television, 4K is basically 4 lots of HD video. So you could have 16 HD video channels coming in or out of your Mac using that thing. So it's quite impressive. But interestingly, for 8K video, you need to use all 4 of those 4K ports to do that. I'll talk a bit more about that later. So yeah, that's what we wanted to stick inside of our beastie. You'll be glad to know it's got connectivity as standard on it anyway. Headphone port, a couple of Thunderbolt 3 ports on the back. And the thing that when they sent me the survey about 3 years ago, saying, what would you like to see on the new Mac Pro? One of the things that I said, for goodness sake, put some standard USB, full-size USB ports on there, because if you've got USB memory sticks or dongles for licensing or things like that, the last thing you want on a really high-end computer is a whole load of adapter cables sticking out the back of this thing that you have to plug your USB stick and what into. So I'm really glad that Apple actually listened. I mean, they're USB 3.1, I think they are super fast USB ports, but you can still plug, you know, sort of an ancient memory stick into it and it'll still work exactly fine. So that's rather good news. Now, if you scroll down to the bottom of this thing, on the bottom of it, you've got your two wired network ports. It's got wireless networking, of course. It's got a power line, somewhere to plug the power cable in. Then above that, you've got an HDMI connector that goes to the monitor. I'm just using it with an HD monitor tonight, just so that I can share this session without sort of lots of strange things happening. And then also there, you've got another 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports. So you've got a whole load of places you can connect stuff into. And then even inside, you've got places where you can plug SATA drives in there. So if you want to do that, you can do that. It's even got an internal USB port. And I had to ask myself, why would you want an internal USB port? The answer apparently is that if you've got a software licensing dongle, or you want to provide some way of secure boot or something like that, that actually you can put something inside the machine. And apparently some companies have been known to put some sort of identification dongle in there and actually glue it in place, so that if anybody actually steals their machine, then it'll be readily identifiable, sort of, if it gets found by the authorities, and they've made it very hard to remove. And without those bits on the board, the computer isn't going to work. So yeah, there's probably a good reason for it for some customers. Quickly move on to performance. Photoshop, this is what probably quite a few of you will be interested in. How does it perform in Photoshop? If you're used to the old MacPro with 12 cores in it, which is pretty much the spec that we had before, then ours is somewhere in between those two, because it's a 24 core. But yeah, you're basically talking about 4.5 times the performance of what was sort of a top-end previous Mac Pro for Photoshop. So basically, everything happens in an instant. If you're using like the sort of radial blur and dust and scratches and all those sort of quite complex filters in Photoshop, then it certainly does the business with that. For those of you that are more interested in like 3D graphics of sort of architectural rendering and things like that, Autodesk Maya, which is one of the leading packages on the Mac for doing that. I've got a copy on here actually, and that's running at well over 3 times the previous Mac Pro. And then the thing that was interesting for me was for video work, which is what we do a lot of, being as I work for BT Sport and do stuff for their TV service, is that they've optimized Apple Compressor, which is the video compression tool that Apple provide for the Mac Pro, so it can use all the GPUs, all the CPU, well, 28 CPU cores, and it will use the Afterburner if you've got it. So there's a whole load of stuff going on there. Yeah, so there's an awful lot happening. Any questions from anybody before I crack on and show you a few apps and things like that are actually running on the machine?
Yeah, Mark, how noisy is it when it's working hard?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I was really scared, because I'm in a home office here, as you might be able to see. It's a reasonable size, but it's not huge. When you're just doing, you know, normal things, in fact, even when I'm editing sort of 8K video, you can't hear it's even there, which is, you know, among sort of the normal sort of noise of the office. So it's not something that's even audible. So Apple have done a fantastic job of it. It does cook out a little bit of heat, which on the hottest days of the year that we had sort of 3 or 4 weeks ago, you could tell it was on then. So that's probably the bigger indicator, to be honest. Even if I sweat it out doing video encoding, which I was doing this afternoon, the fans were only running sort of very, very quietly. So you could just about hear them, but you had to sort of tune into it. So amazingly, runs really quietly, and I'm quite fussy about that sort of thing. So if it did make a noise, don't worry, I'd be telling you about it. But yeah, remarkably quiet.
Mark, it's Jeff Rogers.
Yeah.
You don't have to, but are you going to tell us how much it cost?
Yeah, so the spec that we put together for this one, it's quite high end. It's not, we didn't buy all the options clearly. So this was quite a serious purchase. It was about £16,000. Sharp intake of breath. It's quite a lot of money to spend on a computer. But given the lifetime of it that we're going to use it for and whatever else, then, you know, obviously you cost that out over 3 years and depreciate it and all those sort of things. So it's a serious amount of money, but when you consider it's a server grade computer that's doing desktop stuff in real time as well, it compares reasonably well to, you know, if we go and buy a server from HP or whatever else, certainly with the same sort of performance. So it's not as out of the way as it might sound, but clearly it's far more than any sane individual would spend for a Mac at home.
Okay, good.
There are cheaper options, but you're still talking about sort of £6,000, I think, as a starting point. But to get something that will seriously cut the mustard, then you need to spend a little bit more than that. So yeah, it's got a couple of graphics bays in there. We're just using NPX Bay 1 in ours, so it uses 2 of the slots. And in there goes a thing called an NPX module, which looks like this. It's got its own cooling and everything else on it, so Apple aren't taking anything by chance. Inside that, this is the graphics card we've got. It's a Radeon Pro Vega 2. Let's basically say, gaming wise, you ain't got any problems. Whatever frame rate you want to run your games at and whatever else. We have tried, I have put Steam on here, so just to prove the point. It's more than capable of shifting the pixels, so that's rather good. It's obviously designed to be used with Apple's very high res display. As you know, they also launched at the same time a 6K resolution HDR display. We don't have that yet, so at some point in time it would be very nice to have one. So I'm using it with normally with a 4K display, 4K HDR display, and it drives that very, very nicely indeed. So of course, you can also attach additional displays as well. The graphics card also powers the Thunderbolt port. So if you want to stick a 4K display or an HD display or 2 onto the back of it as well, quite happily drive 3, probably even more displays quite easily. But yeah, I'm focused on the main thing as well. So in terms of graphics, this is where the things that mainly that I'm interested in. Cinema 4D, which is a 3D rendering package that we use. It's seriously fast. DaVinci Resolve Studio editing and effects package, you see there, and then Final Cut Pro. When it comes to editing, as long as it can handle the resolution, the 8K resolution, there's not that much that in normal editing that needs to be speeded up. It's when you start getting into effects that things really make a difference. Just last bit on there, comes with a nice black keyboard and a black mouse just to set it off, so you really know that you're operating at the high end. So yeah, none of this white stuff. It's definitely black is cool as far as the Mac Pro's concerned. The one accessory that perhaps I ought to buy that I haven't got yet is this lock adapter for it, to actually make sure you can actually bolt it down so nobody decides to misappropriate it. So I think that's going to have to be the next purchase for it. Certainly when we get in the office, I think, because there's several people that are going to want to borrow it. But anyway, there's the beast along with the display that we don't have yet. But that's giving you a bit of an overview, hopefully, on what the actual machine is and what it does. So we'll quit out of Keynote. and just got a couple of minutes just to show you some of the other things that we can do with this. I've got several applications running on here. The one that's actually open here is compressor. Got it compressing some video earlier on. It's actually this sequence that I've got loaded in here into Premiere Pro, which is the editing package that we use. And this is some footage that was shot in 8K. It's when we had a very special visitor in the BT Sports studios a bit earlier in the year before lockdown, just in case you're wondering why all the audience are quite close together. This was before all of that kicked off. And this thing will quite happily sort of edit 8K footage without any problems whatsoever. So like this is the equivalent of editing 16 HD videos all at the same time, and it works an absolute treat. It's just like a knife through butter, it really is. And the amazing thing is you can do that, and at the same time you can be running compressor doing an encode, something that I probably would have done on my old machine, certainly not on my laptop, because the whole thing would grind to the halt. This thing just sort of says, oh yeah, I've got enough processor cores, can do that, not a problem. Just sort of doesn't even sort of bat an eyelid at it really. So that's what we've been using it for in the video domain. It can also do some other sort of rather nice things as well. Let me just fire this up for you. Mentioned Cinema 4D. I don't know anybody used Cinema 4D on the call? Doesn't sound like it. It's a 3D graphics editing package used a lot for visual effects in TV and cinema. Also used a lot by computer games modelers for creating 3D worlds and things for computer games. And so let's just open a 3D model in here. And so the idea is that you can have a 3D model and not only edit it in 3D, but also edit it in time as well and animate it. With this, then basically we can, I can just sort of pan around a 3D model, and you can see it does all the sort of reflections and all that sort of mapping and things like that. And it just sort of flies around this thing. And sort of that's pretty impressive. Of course, this is in preview mode at the moment. So you think, oh, well, that's sort of okay, sort of would expect that. But what I can do is I can just go into, oops, if the screen sharing thing wasn't in the way, go into the render menu and do render view, and it just does this. It just sort of goes, right, okay, I'm not going to leave you sort of hours waiting for this 3D scene to render. I'll just do it in real time, and it does. And so there's a whole load of other animation bits and things you can do with this. But yeah, it truly is sort of quite an impressive thing. If you're going to do like this architectural visualization and you want to say, well, actually I've designed this this building, but what would it actually look like with the real world stone textures and whatever else on it, then basically you just sort of, once you've got your view that you want, hit render, and of course it sort of renders, just farms out all the different bits and renders it for you. So it's really quite nice for things like that. So that's Cinema 4D. Nope, don't want to save that. Other things that we use it for, we use it for this thing called Docker. Don't know whether any of you on the call are familiar with that at all as well. But the idea of Docker is that you can run lots of virtual machines on a single sort of server. And it's used a lot for doing things like testing websites and web services, because what you might want to do is build a website and then want to attack it by saying, well, what happens if 1,000 people all try and log on and order something at the same time? And you think, well, to do that, you either need 1,000 students that are all not doing anything at the moment, all to hit a server at the same time, or you could actually design a bit of code that pretends to be a user logging on and ordering something from, say, Amazon or whatever else. And because all those instances look the same, you can make it into what they call a Docker container. And then with something like this, you can fire up 1,000 of those all at the same time, and basically then give them a go command, and they'll all go and attack the web server all at the same time. You can see if your web server survives that, or whether it fails, or what the loading is, and that sort of thing. So that's actually one of the big things that we do. You can also do lots of other things with it. In this particular setup, I've got a video transcoder that I can fire up. It's giving me a new instance. It names them via combinations of 2 words, for some strange words. So this one's called Suspicious Newman or Neumann. And that just did a video encode in a few seconds and then stopped. It did it that quickly. Admittedly, it's not a high-res encode, but you know, it did it. And then I can just sort of fire off another one, it'll pop another instance. This one's called Sad Alice, nothing to do with Mark, I'm sure. He's usually a very happy chappy. And again, before you blinked, it's done it. So it's great for running lots of small tasks, you know, huge, humongous numbers of them all at the same time. So that is that. Of course, it will run all your standard Mac apps as well. So I'm running Zoom on here, as you've seen, Premiere, Photoshop, all of that sort of stuff. So it does all the day job stuff, but it can do all of it pretty much all at once. So that's a bit of an overview of the Mac Pro. Any questions about it? Anything that people particularly want to know about it?
Can I ask a question?
It's a joy to use, really.
Can I ask a question that's actually not Mac Pro related, but who's using 8K?
Who's using it? Earlier in the year, we in BT did the UK's first 8K broadcast, in that we filmed a football match in 8K. And actually, if you saw the Gadget Show, probably about 6 or 8 weeks ago now, then they did a report on us. I've actually got that saved somewhere, so if anybody didn't see it and wants to see it, then I can make that available for people to see. But the big focus of it, Mike, really was all about the Olympics. And in Japan, they've been using 8K for a little while now. And of course, because that's, you know, all of the stuff was happening in, or planned to happen in Southeast Asia, then that was the plan, was to make that footage available in 8K. The big place that makes a difference is when you're doing big outside screens, you know, cinema size screens or bigger. So part of the plan for the Olympics was to have some huge screens out in, say, places like Hyde Park and things like that, that would be showing Olympics events in 8K. Obviously, our current medical crisis completely stopped all of that, not only the Olympics, but also the outside displays as well. So so the work we've got planned for that rather halted. But yeah, in terms of film producers, a lot of films, a lot of the very recent films are being shot in that resolution and being edited in that resolution, even if, you know, they're not being distributed to the home in that quality. But yeah, so it's going to be it's the next big thing. Whether we need it or not, who knows? For me, 4K is, you know, and I work in the industry, 4K is pretty much spot on. Will 8K, you know, make things so much better for home viewing? Don't think so. But for big sort of sets and stage shows and, you know, theatre and cinema and stuff like that, it's definitely here and will be here to stay. So that's 8K.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll eventually get 8K at home. You can buy a Samsung telly that does it now, but they're not cheap. That's what we were using for our tests. So we were delivering to Samsung 8K TVs. It did look very good, I must admit, but I don't think I'll be investing in one for quite a while yet.
It puzzles me that here in East Anglia, we're still getting our BBC local news in standard definition. What the hell's that about?
It is quite staggering, isn't it? Really, that's the case. It's mainly to do with the amount of radio space, or RF spectrum as they call it, that's actually available in the airwaves that's allocated for TV. And as you know, we only get, what is it, 5 channels in HD sort of over the air. And it's just because the government have sold off all the rest of the spectrum to the mobile phone companies because they could make more money that way, and apparently that's more useful. So that's the reason we don't get our local news in HD.
I'd always assumed it was the BBC being tight.
Well, at the end of the day, they do have to, obviously, have to pay for that transmitter time and all of that stuff, and it does cost real money. So it is true, that's an element of it. But actually, the spectrum issue is more of the problem. But there are moves afoot. So yes, I will take your concerns, Mike, and direct them in an appropriate direction.
Can you say a few words about what Afterburner does?
Yeah. So Afterburner is different from a GPU card. So as probably most of you are aware, as part of a graphics card, there's this capability called GPU, or graphics processing units, that are very good at rendering complex 3D scenes and things. So you've got all that built into the machine as standard. So how does Afterburner differ from that? Basically, what it is that it's a board that's got a thing on there called an FPGA, a field programmable gate array. And what that is, it's basically, imagine it as being a blank circuit board inside your computer. And what you can do is you can program that circuit board. I'll download some code to it that basically is the same as if you were building an electronic circuit on that chip in real time. And so what you can do is basically make that chip become some custom electronics that is designed to do a particular job very, very, very quickly. And so if you want something that can do real-time audio processing, say you wanted something that could, oh goodness forbid it, analyze speech that were coming through phone lines to see if people were saying anything that they shouldn't be saying, or something incredibly useful from an espionage point of view, then you could have a set of electronics that is designed specifically to look out for certain keywords that people were saying, like bomb, for example, and then sort of detect that very quickly on, hundreds or thousands of phone calls at a time. Also, you can use FPGA for sort of far nicer things, like doing very fast video compression, because you basically just design an electronic set of gates that does that particular thing very quickly, and it can do it far quicker than a general purpose computer like an Intel CPU, or even GPUs can. And that's what Afterburner is. It's the first time that I know of an FPGA card being made available for a general purpose computer, for an off-the-shelf buyable computer. Somebody correct me if they know otherwise. You'll find FPGAs used in all sorts of things, all sorts of other bits of kit. Certainly we've got a lot in video kit that we use, but having one inside a computer is a new thing. And yeah, I haven't tried it yet, so I can't tell you how good it is, but certainly very exciting concept anyway. Did that answer your question okay?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Great. Cool.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. Well, I think I'm getting towards the end of my time slot, so I shall pass back to you, Mike. But if there are any more questions, then save them up to the end, and I'll try my best to answer them.
Fantastic. So if anybody needs to tear off to the loo, now is your chance. And David, I can't see you at the moment because I'm not in gallery view, but I hope you're raring to go.
Oh, I'm still here.
Good. So if you'd like to share your screen when you're ready, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Is that doing anything for you?
It is. Yep, I can see your desktop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And you can see me, presumably.
Yes.
Zoom seems to have disappeared at the moment, but I can't see anything at the moment. I think we've gone. It's got a little bit at the top here.
So, sorry, what are you seeing at the moment?
At the moment, I'm seeing a page of, well, it says desktop 1.
Could I suggest that you just come out of screen sharing for a second? Let's go back to you.
I can't see Zoom at the moment. I've lost my Zoom.
Well, I should be able to do that. Hang on.
It says Zoom at the top. It says I'm in Zoom, but I've lost all my controls and everything.
Okay.
That's better.
So I've just pulled you out.
Right.
So just try again.
Okay.
So we're definitely seeing your.
I'm seeing my screen now.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Great. Floor's
Okay.
all yours. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Before I start, I've got a keynote thing. It's all going to be very simple after that complicated instruction. That's so way above my head, all that stuff. So this is going to be very, very simple compared with all that. But I'll just show you some of the models which I'm talking about size-wise, so you can see what they are. So I'm talking about 00 gauge for those who don't have models, which are that size wagons. If they're coaches, they're that size. And if we go into O gauge, which I might mention, then it's that size.
Can you hold them, David? Can you hold them slightly higher?
Sorry.
Certainly on my my little 13-inch screen. Yeah, they were masked by your name. That's better. Thank you.
Yeah, that's that size. And wagons are that size, so 00.
Great.
Okay, so I'll just open up a keynote, and I've done, and we can just quickly run through why I'm doing this in the first place and what started me off. So this is one of my hobbies, designing and printing overlays at home with Dublo. And why do I do it? Just to quickly run through what it is. If you're not into modeling, you probably don't know all this stuff, but some of you may remember going, if you're my age, as lads, you had Meccano sets. Well, Meccano was produced by Hornby of Liverpool. Meccano was produced by Meccano of Liverpool, and Frank Hornby was the instigator of it all. He's a very clever engineer whose idea was to get young people, mostly men in those days, of course, or boys, interested in engineering. And he designed a very simple forerunner of Lego, which some of you may remember, just metal plates with holes in, nuts and bolts, and you would screw them together and make things out of them. So that was the basis of it. He thought this was a very good idea, and it was very successful. He was a good businessman. So he then looked at the Germans who were producing trains at the same time and thought, there's some money to be made in that. We could do with some British trains. And so he started to produce the Hornby O-gauge trains. And this was 1921. And this is the sort of thing he produced, a basic set, which he could sell complete with track and trains and everything else. And these went well. And then he thought, well, that's a limited market because only fairly rich people with fairly large houses can run that stuff. It's quite large by the time you get it all set out. And he thought a smaller set would be a good idea. So he produced the Hornby Doubleau trains, which was my main interest. And as you can see there, it's a tabletop railway, and again was very successful. And this was produced from 1938 onwards. Obviously, the war intervened. After the war, a great many more produced. They got into full production again. And this was the first set, which I was fortunate enough to be bought by my parents. I have to say I wasn't a train fan. I'm still not a real train fan, but I just loved the toy. A remote controlled, electric remote control. You go forwards and backwards. You could do all sorts of things, make the tracks and shunt and all the stuff. And it was a nice toy. But of course, it went into the bottom of the wardrobe once I developed other interests. And it wasn't until in my sort of middle age that my mother fortunately kept it and said, no, have it back. I don't want this. And I put it on the table and set it all up. Oh, this is fun. Now I've got the money, I can afford some of the big things, which I never could when I was little. So I eventually joined this national organisation, the Hornby Railway Collectors Association, and got to meet a few local people and built up a fairly modest collection. And then I started to think, well, there are certain things that Hornby didn't make, and I would quite like to have some of those. And a lot of the people in this organisation were making models that weren't made by Hornby, but using their original vans and coaches. And they were painting them and lining them and lettering them. Some very, very well. They look beautiful. But I thought, that's very hard work. Surely I could do this on the Mac with a program and produce something. Well, this was the O-gauge range of models, and they produced a nice range of models, which I thought, you know, we could do that in double O-gauge, surely. Oh, we don't seem to be able to go any further for some reason. Why is that? I think my Keynote must have, oh, there we go. And they produced these models such as this. Well, I thought, well, that'd be nice. Hornby Doubleau never did anything like that. I could produce something like that, surely. So I started to have a go on this was a standard 00 model, you know, which is okay, fine, you know. But I thought I could make one of those into something a bit different. So with the Mac and Illustrator, I thought, here we go. And so I started producing these sort of things, which was the 00 size, but based on the O-gauge. And I thought, yeah, look, before long, you know, I'd sort of built up quite a few of these. And I thought, yeah, but this was my own interest. But, you know, people saw them and said, oh, can you make me one? And so I eventually started producing them for the organisation, our national organisation. And then people said, well, you know, can we have something for our sort of anniversary events that we put on? So I produced a few sort of things like this, which were quite popular. And so a sheet of these sort of things, which would look something like that. In Illustrator, there's obviously 5 there, but I put them all together onto a sheet of paper, and I could print 5 off at once. And if people required them, and there were a few people interested, so I'd do them more or less as a service. This wasn't an industry or a business. I did it as a service for other people and in the organisation, and it's been quite successful over the years. So I've sort of carried on. That was a simple wagon. You see the original at the top there, and one I produced below, which again was done in the larger size, but not in the smaller size. I also had to go at some of the tankers, which some of these tankers can be extremely expensive. There weren't many made, and they do fetch an awful lot of money now. So I thought, well, I could make repros of those, and for a few pounds, people would have something to look like it if they couldn't afford the high prices for a real one. So I did that and made a few for myself, and they went quite well. And there's another one which is one of the rarer ones. I also went then into coaches. I thought, well, yes, there were a lot of coaches they didn't make, so I could do like the one above as an original one. The one below is they didn't make. That's a restaurant car, and this type of thing was of interest to me, and several other people were interested and bought them. Again, another one there. a standard one above by Hornby, and then my overlaid model below, which was just to add to a train of existing models, just to make it a bit of variation for people. So I mean, it's a thing which could be used, I felt, in other applications maybe, but that's the way I use it, my own personal interest. So let's just escape from that for a moment. And I'll open up some of the things. So obviously I had all this done in Illustrator. I came by Illustrator simply because I was in the print trade. And when I sort of took semi-retirement, my actual field of work was retouching, color retouching, and not illustrating. I'd never had I'm not an illustrator, never have been. I never had any lessons in illustrating or in how to use Illustrator. So everything's sort of self-learned and self-taught, which I don't recommend to anybody with a complicated program like Illustrator. But I realized as things went on and the things like Catalina came along and the upgrades were leaving my Illustrator version further and further behind. It was a bit cranky anyway, and I realized I was going to have to either fork out the high monthly fee for Illustrator or move on to something else. And sort of looking around, I wanted something which would open my Illustrator files, and Designer seemed a good option. And of course, looking at others, everybody seemed to think Designer would work well, and it would actually open up an Illustrator Design, which I thought, well, that is my essential need really to start with, because otherwise I just can't produce anymore or work on the ones I have. So anyway, I went in for Illustrator Designer, but before I did that and dumped Illustrator altogether and upgraded, I thought I've really got to make sure I've got some backups for all these things. So I saved everything as PDF. So if I open up that PDF, you'll see there are my Illustrator designs. These are done for an A4 sheet of paper, produced in PDF, and that seems fine. I can actually work on that. I can do one at a time or do the whole lot. But of course it's fixed. I can't actually change it. If I want to change the color of something or change any aspect to it, in PDF I'm stuck. So I do need my Designer program. So having bought Designer, I then I then opened up an Illustrator file using Designer. I'll use 300 dpi, and I'll use RGB, and I'll open it. Think, oh well, that's good, everything's worked, it's all there. That's just what I want. Designer's done the job. But then I started to look a bit closer, and I thought, hang on, what's that? Ah, that looks a bit odd. Those lettering are strange. That should be a lettering with a stroke, and that's all sort of, that's odd. There's another one there, that looks a bit odd as well. Some look okay, and that looks a bit odd there. That one looks fine, yeah, no problem. So does that one. So there's obviously a few glitches there, which I'm not too sure about. I'd better sort of investigate that a bit more thoroughly. So I thought, well, I'll select that. I'll just select one of these and see what's happened. I'm using Designer, and that's strange. So looking down at these layers, I've got a group there, I've got one layer and a group there, and a load of groups in there. So the whole thing has come over as one layer with a load of stuff in it. So anything I try to select within these things, I just get that whole layer. So I can't really get into it unless I ungroup everything, which is obviously the main thing I've got to do. I will say at this stage, because I was a novice at Illustrator, I didn't work in the right way. And if anyone who does design was sitting there thinking, well, why are they all like that? I'm not at all sure whether all the layers come over correctly in Designer from Illustrator. I had an old version of Illustrator. Maybe if it was a more modern Illustrator, they would. But many of the layers that I'd created don't seem to have come over. They have just come over as one complete mass. And that does make it quite difficult, because if there's anything you want to change in design, you've then got to start really going into it. So the only way I can get into anything here is by ungrouping everything. And if you go into layers, we've got ungroup all. And I've found you have to ungroup all to be able to get into anything. So if I now try and select something in there, now you see, I can have a close look at that. And what have we got there? We've got S, just the outline, but not the actual type. This was done in a type tool, so these weren't created as individual letters, they were created as in a type tool. That, well, there's bits of type in there, but not all of them. Which is all the bits, but there again, that's not particularly unusual, because of my ignorance and my bad work practice in Illustrator. I didn't probably create these as they should be created. So I thought, well, maybe that's that's probably maybe my fault that's causing all that. Let's look at this one. I can select something like that. If I do select and go into one of these, again, this is coming up as a group rather than. So again, I've got to go back to my layers and group all again. So I've got a series of groups, which they weren't originally, I'm sure. But so I've got a certain amount of problems here. Again, I've got bits and pieces of letters, not with a stroke. If you look down here, you see they're all individual. They're not done as a piece of text. That one is, the word biscuits is done as a piece of text, but all the rest are done as individual items. So, there's quite a lot of problems here. So they didn't all come across like this, but some did. And so I've got to seriously think about how I'm going to sort of treat them now. I'll just go back and look at one or two others. If I open up some of the other items on here. Which one has gone now? I'll open that one. Now this is another interesting case. Now that looks fine. I couldn't see any problem with that at all. But if you actually analyze it, this item here was actually imported and placed as a PDF. It's a logo which I designed for the club, and I simply had a simple PDF image, and I placed it on that design once it was finished. But if we open that up now, you will see that it's made of a collection of items. It's far from being a single item that's been designed. If I go into line view rather than color view, we can see. Now, for some strange reason, I've got something that looks like a world there. Each letter is individual. Each line is individual. There's about 10 different pieces in there, which certainly shouldn't be there. The original, I go back to my original. If I go back to this and say place, sorry, I want to place a file. There's a PDF. As you see, that's a simple, straightforward PDF. And when I produce that in Illustrator, I'll say place. I can drag that in. That comes in as a single item. As you see, that's a single item, roughly the same size, but that's just one item, whereas this has come across, as goodness knows how many items. All of that is, each letter is going to be like, there are dozens and dozens of pieces, and the piece in the middle is a, sorry, but as you can see, the whole thing is is very odd, and certainly not as I placed it in Illustrator. So that's another serious problem, which I found, which if anyone's thinking of moving over from one to the other, they ought to seriously think about how, if this is going to happen to them, because I don't know, it might just happen to me. I know for certain facts, certain things I did correctly, and they say haven't come across correctly. Other things to come across without any trouble at all. So I really don't, I can't get to the bottom of it. Designer works very well. On my MacBook Pro, it's smooth, it doesn't crash. If I'm running through layers and all this sort of stuff, it doesn't give me any problems at all. But compared with the original files that I created, I don't feel I'm getting many of them coming across correctly. They are recoverable, but it is a long-winded job to go through and recover them all as you want them. I've got one or two more that I could show you, but it is basically the same thing. Now this one, here are some wagons here which were created again in Illustrator. Now that seems to come across in a better way, because I can select that if you look at in layers here, it is a group, but it's come as a proper piece of text with no problems. Admittedly, these don't have strokes around them, but they don't seem to be producing the same problem on that one. And I think some of this is down to me because, as I say, I'm an amateur. I've never been taught Illustrator. And I think if I was trying to advise somebody I wouldn't try and teach anybody because I'm not really up to it. But if I was advising someone to start from scratch, I would say, don't work as I did. I would get carried away. I'd create this, I'd create that, I'd create that. And I'd just keep going. And you've got to think totally different. You've got to think, firstly, in layers. You've got to work in layers all the time. And anything you do, you must think layer first, then the object, rather than the object first, then try and put in layers afterwards, because that's hard work. In this particular one, I've got individual layers for each object. So I can treat each object individually and turn them on and off. I can do with whatever I like with them. They've come across satisfactorily, and they've come across as I created them. But some of these have not done that, and I'm still not really sure whether it was me or not. But it is something worth thinking about. So that's one thing I would say. If you're going to use Designer or really any type of Illustrator, you really should think in layers first, and then once you've got that, you're in much better position. It's a bit like saying, okay, I'm going to create a tree. In my ignorance in the old days, I've started with a trunk, and I'd have drawn that, and then I'd drawn the branches, and then I'd drawn the twigs, and then I'd drawn a leaf, and I thought, oh yes, that's all right. And then I duplicated all the leaves and I stick them all on. And then I think, oh, I want to change those leaves, so I want them a slightly different color. And of course, they're all down there as individual items. So you've got to think in, okay, I'm going to create a leaf layer. I'll create a layer. Then I'll start to create a leaf, and I'll put that leaf in that layer. And then in future dates, if I want to change it, it's easily accessible. And this is the aspect of design which I wasn't really taught, and I didn't really teach myself. I know it now, but it's a bit too late. I've got some other illustrations. It's getting a bit late, which I could show you how I go about actually making one from scratch. Whether you'll be interested in that, you're probably not. So, but that is, I really wanted to impress on people that it works, and it has, I think a designer has all the aspects of the Illustrator had. It has one other serious downfall which Illustrator had, even my old version, and Designer doesn't have, and that is if I have a, doesn't really matter what I bring up. If I bring this back up, if I wanted, for example, to change the thickness of these lines, in actual fact, you see they're all designed as individual lines, all drawn as individual items. And I said, oh, okay, I want to change the thickness of those. How do I do that? In Illustrator, you would go to Select, and you would have an option for, you'd obviously select the layer you wanted, but it would have an option there for select a line, similar lines. So if all my lines were in, say, 5 points, I could say select lines, similar lines, and all the 5-point lines that I selected one there, all the 5-point lines would come up, and I could then change them. Designer does not have this option. The same with if you want to change the color of something. If I've got a mass of things on a page which are all the same color, I want to change the color, and I haven't got them all in one layer, which I didn't have originally probably, and I could, in Illustrator, I could go back to select, and I could select one, and I'd say select same color fill, and the whole lot would be selected for me. I just changed the color, simple as that. If you haven't done that in design, you've got to select everyone by hand, and that's a long-winded process. So that is a serious downfall, and I've seen certain comments on the internet about it as being a serious downfall for designer. They do say they're going to work on it and produce it, and I'd quite happily pay money to have it because it's such a useful feature. But again, it points to the fact that you do need your layer structure. If when I designed this, I'd written a layer, I'd created a layer in here, gone down, create a layer, and I'd said, there's a layer there. I'd say, okay, I'll call that side 1 line work. Okay, that's my side 1. Except it doesn't say side, it says something older. Side 1 line work. Okay, so there's a layer. I then come into my line work and I say, I'll create a line, another line in here, and it'll go down there. Like that. You can't see it because it's not on the right layer. Okay, I'm going to see it now. There we go. I'll give it a stroke. Make it 5 points black. Okay, there's my line. So I created a line now, which is there. My new layer which I created is there, so I really want that line to be in there. So I have found this a bit difficult to do. In Illustrator, I would simply drag it in, and it would, oops, I don't know where that's gone. I would simply drag it into the layer. I find that quite difficult to do. I've lost my original layer now. I don't know where it's gone. Well, there it is there. Okay, so let's go back and select that. So what I'm trying to do is put that into side 1 artwork. So in Illustrator, I simply drag it in like that. Now what it's done, it has 2 facilities to when you start dragging layers around, and one is for the object that you selected to work as a mask, and one is for it simply to stay as it is in the layer. Now every time I seem to do this, it seems to there is a knack of getting it in there without there's got a little box in there, and that means it's going to work as a mask. It's not working correctly. So I find this, I can do this 3 or 4 times and not get it right. And there's definitely a knack to it. I do find it quite difficult to get that. So I often find it's easier. Let's done it again. I often find it's easier just to delete it, only with Command X. So I copied it, then select my line artwork and paste it in. And now it's gone in properly without that little box. So I know I've got that line in that layer. If I turn the layer off, that should disappear, which it has. So there are certain aspects, but I think, again, you see, it all comes down to my ignorance, not working properly in layers. And Designer is definitely a program which you need to use layers and use it properly too. So it's very much a learning process. And I'm still learning. So for anybody who's probably worked in design all their lives, are probably laughing and they're going, well, it's all your fault. You didn't do it right in the first place, which is probably correct. But really, that's basically what I do. So it's a matter of, you can work this type of thing is fine. You can produce logos or anything really that will fit your printer. And that you have a need for. I found that one of the most difficult things is getting this color match. You need, even if your screen and your printer is matched exactly, you have to do a number of tests to produce a color, which is, if you're trying to match a color of a model, then you've got to obviously play around and do tests and get that color just right, and then note down your color values so you know exactly what they're going to be. So you can actually, like, for example, that's a sort of greeny gray. But so once I've got that set up, that's actually set up on CMYK at the moment, because being an ex-printer, that's how I worked. But you need to jot those figures down either in 3 RGB or in 4 colors, and keep those as a reference to make sure you get your colors to match. But that again is a specific problem for this type of thing, which you probably wouldn't encounter all that often. Basically, that's it. If anyone's still awake, if you have any questions, then please ask them. I'll do my best to answer them.
David, I'm busting to ask this question because trying to move from Photoshop to Affinity Photo to run my classes with Affinity Photo, I found that the 2 programs are really unbelievably similar, but everything is called something slightly different. Yeah. So just as an example, a layer mask in Photoshop is the same as a mask layer in Affinity Photo. They're the same thing, but just with the words swapped. Did you recognize Designer the moment you opened it? Did it feel comfortable to?
Yes, it's a pretty intuitive program, I think. I've really there were certain aspects of it which I wasn't vague on, but of course there are some excellent videos on YouTube. Affinity produced a number of basic ones which are certainly worth watching to go right through from start to finish, to learn all the different aspects of it. I mean, there are so many aspects of all these programs which I just don't use because I'm just not that far advanced in what I want to do.
Sure.
No, I think it is a good program. I'm pleased that I made the switch because, as I say, Illustrator was, apart from the cost factor, which, this isn't a business, so I'm just doing it as a hobby, and I couldn't really justify the cost factor. But for the value, it's extraordinary. It's a powerful program, but it does have these 1 or 2 faults, and I think bringing Illustrator's designs over is possibly one of them, and certainly the lack of 1 or 2 features which it doesn't have, but which may change in the future. But
it's a very young program, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think they've done remarkably well. And you say photo is excellent as well, and of course you can import your photos into the Illustrator Designer, the Affinity Designer, and they come in fine. You know, if I want to place an image in there, a PDF or a TIFF or whatever, they'll come in, you know, beautifully, and you can work on them. And of course, it has the facility, once they're in there, you can go into the design section, all your controls change, and you can work on the bitmap in the same way that you work on the vector graphics, and do your work on there and then go back. It's, you know, it's very versatile.
Do you mind if I stop sharing your screen so that we can see everyone?
Yeah.
David, a question. I'm interested in what you're printing onto and how you stick it onto your wagons.
All right. Well, I've got an Epson printer which is A4, and I've never, up to now, because they're small models, I haven't needed anything bigger. I have to find a thin paper, because thick paper doesn't look right at all. The original models were tin plated, and they were printed in litho on tin. They were beautifully done and intricately done. And I wanted something that looked like that. So when they're going around, they look the same as the tin plated models. And only thin paper will do it. Epson, unfortunately, don't make anything thin enough. And I found that 135 GSM was the maximum I could really stand. And I had to do an internet hunt and I've been using a paper called Neo, produced NEO, that's the name of it. I've been using that for years, and it's a high gloss finish. And the color is as good as Epson's color, as far as I'm concerned. As for the work I'm doing, it's probably not as good for photography, but it's certainly good for this sort of stuff. There is now another one which I've found, and they've stuck on with just an adhesive. PVA glue is probably ideal because that's easily removed. Once it's on, it's not on that hard. You can use Evo stick or anything, these sort of things, but it's water based, and so it does stretch the overlay slightly. So you have to allow for that size wise, to make them just a fraction bigger to start with. But once it's on, it's not on there that hard. You can just peel them off and they look much as they did before. So that's a good versatile thing, because not everybody wants to keep them on forever, and it looks good. Well, I think they look good anyway. So the actual appearance of them is very comparable to the models that they printed.
David, it's Jeff here. Have you done any of these designs directly in Affinity Designer and not bringing them through, you know, started from scratch?
I have, yes. I've only done one or two because I've had spent so much time getting the ones I brought across correct. Plus, I haven't had time this year. That's usually a sort of winter's job. I've been doing this probably about 12 years or so. So I haven't really done anything completely from scratch and produced it, but I've certainly experimented enough to get them to that stage, and it works fine. Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with it. Yeah. Only as long as I work properly and make sure I get the layers, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well done.
Brilliant.
David, it's Mark here. With regard to your importing the original files from Illustrator into Affinity, when you had problems with it, did you ever contact Serif to say, have you seen this before? Do you know what's going on? If not, I'd suggest you do so, because it could probably help a lot of other people having the same problem.
That's a good point. I haven't done that, but you say that is probably worth certainly letting them know, with a couple of samples perhaps, just to sort of so they can see what's happening. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll have to do that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Any more questions, ladies and gents? I think it's gone 9 o'clock.
Yep.
Look at the time.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Jeffrey. Oh, God. He's gagging for a glass of wine, I suspect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for those two presentations. Absolutely fascinating evening.
Yeah,
And,
very good.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Well, I look forward to seeing you all again this time next month for some more. David, as far as placing layers is concerned, I know the answer, but I couldn't because it's exactly the same in Affinity Photo. So I'll drop you an email,
Right.
showing you what you need to do. So
Yeah.
I'll organise that tomorrow. Thank you so much, everyone. Lovely to see you as ever. Stay well, and we'll see you in the same place next month.
Well done.
Thank you.
Oh, and George,
Thank you, everyone.
George, please
Thank
thank
you.
Cindy for her German.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you.
Guys,
Bye.
bye now.
Bye. Well done.
Bye.
See you next month.
Cheers.
We're going to leave now. Here we go.
That gin and tonic's getting closer. Marvellous.
Mike, this will be downloadable, will it?
Yes, it will. Yeah. I mean, you know the drill. We just asked for a tiny donation towards club funds, but yes, of course. Yeah. Oh, look, it's Miss Riley.
Yes, she's just woken up. Sadly, she was asleep, but she isn't now. So she thought she'd come and join in the fun. That's why we're in a darkened room, just so she doesn't get the idea it's suddenly morning again. So yes, she will be being reacquainted with her bed in just a couple of minutes' time. But I thought she might just like to come and contribute further, being as she'd already done quite well in the video.
Fantastic. So, yeah. Yes. Having provided us with the soundtrack earlier.
Yeah. I did think about using spectra layers to filter them out, but I thought, oh, I'm sure you guys can put up with it.
Oh, it was brilliant. Thank you very much.
Oh, pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, nice one. Well done, Mark.
Really,
thank you, gentlemen. Very good night to you.
Yeah. Cheers all.